This is a story set in downtown Seattle. During a zombie outbreak, a city lockdown, a blackout, a network collapse, and a supply shortage, and I am a food delivery driver trapped inside my apartment tower, trying to hold the building's doors, its supplies, and its people together until an official safe corridor opens. The first time I died, it happened in the service stairwell between the package room and the lobby, with rainwater on the concrete and a half-closed door banging against its hinge. I had spent 3 years learning that tower by smell and sound. The lobby smelled like wet wool, burnt coffee, and too much disinfectant. The package room smelled like cardboard and plastic tape. The service stairwell held old paint dust and stale air from the garage below. I knew which elevator groaned before it opened. I knew which floors had the slowest doors. I knew that if a driver set a paper bag too close to the radiator, the fries would come back ruined. That mattered for work, because I was a food delivery driver. It also mattered because I lived in the building I delivered to, and that made every shortcut feel harmless until it was not. On the night I died, the lobby was crowded with people pretending not to be worried. The news on the wall screens had been talking about emergency room incidents for 2 days. The articles all used the same careful language. Unusual patients, aggressive behavior, temporary transport delays, local authorities investigating. By midnight, the words had started to change. A cluster of violent incidents downtown. A request to avoid the transit tunnel. Then, a camera clip from a hospital waiting room showed a man biting a security guard, and the city did what cities always do when they can no longer pretend a problem is local. It started moving its fear from one block to the next. I remember hearing it before I saw it. The service stairwell door upstairs slammed once. Then there was a second noise, lower and wetter, like someone falling against concrete. A woman called for help from the landing, and I knew her voice because I had carried groceries to her floor twice a week for months. She was out of breath. She kept saying there was someone hurt. She kept saying she needed someone with a key. I took my flashlight and my spare keyring and went up one flight because that was what a decent person did in a building full of neighbors. The door at the landing was cracked open. The light inside the stairwell had gone dim from a power flicker, and the emergency strip under the handrail had not fully come on yet. I should have waited. I should have looked around the corner first. Instead, I pushed the door wider with my shoulder and stepped onto the landing. The infected came around the turn with blood on its chin and its hands already reaching. I remember the shape of the face more than the face itself. Gray skin, glassy eyes, a shirt stuck to the front with dark wet patches. I remember the first impact when it hit me and the ridiculous fact that my flashlight bounced once on the concrete and kept shining upward, making everything look unreal. I remember trying to back up while the woman behind the door screamed and the narrow stairwell turned every sound into a wall. Then my heel slipped on the wet landing. My shoulder hit the rail. The door pushed wider than it should have. The infected got enough room to grab me. I understood, in one clean second, that I had made the one mistake I could not recover from. When I woke again, I was sitting in my apartment with the delivery app open on my phone and the clock reading 5:14 in the morning. For a full minute, I did not move. Rain tapped the window. The heater in the wall clicked once and settled. Down in the street, a truck hissed through a puddle and passed without stopping. My room looked exactly the same as it had before I died, which was the cruelest part. The same laundry chair with 2 clean shirts folded over it. The same cheap desk. The same insulated delivery bag leaning against the wall. The same stack of paper menus I never meant to throw away. I checked my hands first. No blood, no bite marks. Then I checked the date. 1 week earlier. I sat there long enough for the reality of it to settle into place. Not a dream, not a fever, not a panic attack. I knew what would happen because I had already watched it happen once from the wrong side of a stairwell door. I did not know why I had been given another chance, and I did not stop to argue with the logic of it. I had died, and then I had not. That was enough information for one morning. By 6, I was counting the apartment like inventory. The kitchen had 3 decent shelves, a small freezer, and a narrow cabinet above the sink that was too high to use for anything important. The bedroom closet could hold boxes if I stacked them to the ceiling, but I would hate myself every time I needed a sweater. The hall closet contained an old vacuum, 2 rolls of trash bags, a cracked toolbox, and a cheap emergency radio from some holiday kit I had bought years before and never tested. The bathroom had enough room for a plastic bin and nothing else. The apartment door had a deadbolt, a chain, and one small glass inset that I could cover with cardboard if I had to. The building mattered more than the room. The package room sat beside the lobby and had a lock, a camera, and enough floor space for supply boxes if nobody cared to ask questions. The service corridor behind it connected to the freight elevator and the stairwell. The freight elevator opened onto a loading alcove at the rear of the tower and usually stayed quiet except for maintenance deliveries and trash runs. The east stairwell was wider but brighter. The west stairwell was narrower and smelled like dust, which made it easier to keep an eye on, but worse to stand in for long. The roof access door was useful only if I wanted a way out or a way to watch the block. I knew all of it because I had delivered food through all of it. That was the part that convinced me I could survive there, if anywhere. I did not need a mansion or a bunker. I needed a building I understood better than the people who owned it. I wrote the weak points down on paper. Then I wrote the supplies I would need if the city started failing before the week was out. Food first. Water first. Medicine. Batteries. Light. Tape. Trash bags. A way to block the glass in the door. Something to hold the service corridor shut. A radio that still worked when the phone signal did not. Anything that could turn a tower full of neighbors into a set of predictable spaces. By 7:30 I had my shoes on and the delivery bag empty. I started with the grocery market 2 blocks east, because if panic was coming, shelves would go before anything else. I took cash. I took a paper list. I took a second empty tote in case I found more than I expected, which I knew I would not. The city looked normal in the gray Seattle morning, which made me angrier than if it had looked broken. A barista was rolling out a sidewalk sign. A cyclist splashed through an intersection with a rain cover over one shoulder. 2 office workers stood under an awning and argued over whether they needed umbrellas if they were only going a single block. The world was still pretending to be itself. The first thing I noticed inside the market was the way people avoided the end of the produce aisle. No one said why. No one had to. The bread section had already been picked over, and the bottled water was moving faster than the stockers could stack it. I heard one man on his phone tell somebody in a low voice to get to the pharmacy now, not later. A mother with 2 children filled a cart with rice, boxed pasta, crackers, and applesauce like she had been planning for a storm for years. Maybe she had. Maybe she had just reached the point where every family hits the same invisible line and decides normal is over. I bought the things I knew would survive a week without refrigeration: rice, oats, canned soup, tuna packets, peanut butter, crackers, powdered drink mix, instant noodles, salt, sugar, coffee, tea. A few shelf-stable fruit cups because I knew that after 2 days of canned food, a sweet thing would matter more than anyone admitted. I did not buy as much as I wanted to. I bought what I could move. At the pharmacy, the clerk had the tired look of someone already preparing to lie to customers in a calm voice. The shelves were still full in the places that mattered. Fever reducers, pain relievers, anti-diarrhea tablets, antihistamines, bandages, gauze, tape, alcohol wipes, gloves, thermometers. I took what I could carry without looking greedy. I added a bottle of antiseptic, a pack of disposable masks, and 2 cheap nasal sprays that would probably be useless, but made me feel better in the moment. At the hardware store, I bought batteries, 3 LED lanterns, 2 headlamps, a pry bar, duct tape, zip ties, a utility knife, a roll of thick plastic sheeting, a hammer, a box of hooks, and a pair of padlocks that looked more expensive than they were. I also bought a folding cart because I knew the tower's service route and I knew the things that mattered most were the ones too heavy to carry in one trip. The clerk asked me if I was preparing for a storm. I almost told him yes. Instead, I said Seattle was always preparing for a storm, which made him laugh weakly and not ask anything else. When I got back, I did not take the elevator. I hauled the first load up the stairs because I wanted to feel the building in my legs before it started failing in more obvious ways. On the 4th floor landing, I stopped to breathe and listen to the tower. I heard a TV through one apartment wall. I heard a child running in socks. I heard a dog bark once and then quiet down. Nothing was wrong yet. That was the worst part. Disaster always feels late until the exact second it arrives. I spent the rest of the morning turning my apartment into a room that could be defended. The window over the fire escape got blackout fabric first, then tape along the edges so I could see shadows without broadcasting light to the street. I moved the bed away from the door and replaced it with the bookcase, which was heavier and easier to shove back into place if I needed to buy time. I put the flashlight, radio, spare batteries, and knife on the kitchen counter where I could reach them without crossing the room. I filled every bottle and jug I had with water. Drinking water went in one corner, cooking water in another, cleaning water in the bathroom. I labeled each container with a marker because I did not trust my own future tiredness. Then I tested the locks. Deadbolt, chain, latch, glass cover. The apartment door held better than I expected, but I wanted more than a lock. I wanted habits. I wanted every important object to have a place. I wanted the room to become a map I could navigate blind. At noon, Marisol Vega knocked on my door. She lived 2 floors below me and had a voice that carried the confidence of someone used to people listening to her. I knew her mostly as the woman who always wore plain shoes and bought tea instead of coffee on the rare occasions she ordered delivery. She had retired from ICU nursing 5 years earlier. If the hallway gossip was accurate, that meant she had seen things in a hospital I had never wanted to see. She did not smile when I opened the door a crack. She held up 2 small paper cups of instant coffee and said she had heard the radio and wanted to know if I was hearing the same reports she was hearing. I opened the door only enough to let the coffee through. She nodded at the taped window, the stacked water, and the delivery bags lined against the wall. "Good," she said quietly. "You are not the only person in this tower who knows how bad this can get." I asked what she meant. She said the hospital rumors were no longer rumors. A friend in triage had sent her a message before the network started failing. Violent patients, confusion, a few staff injuries. One emergency exit blocked because a man had bitten through a security uniform like it was cloth. She did not say it like a sensational story. She said it like something she had already started arranging her thoughts around. I asked if she thought it was infection. She looked at me for a long second and said the symptom list was too ugly to ignore. Fever first, in some cases. Confusion. Staggering. Red eyes. Then the aggression. Then the bite risk. She also said that in a stairwell, one person turning late was enough to ruin the whole landing. That was the first time I heard another person say the exact thing I had learned by dying. I wrote it down on paper and kept the note on the counter. Marisol did not ask me for supplies. She asked me what I had and what I planned to protect. I told her the truth in simple terms. Food for 2 weeks if I was careful. Water for less if I was not. A radio that might keep me ahead of the blackout. A building I knew well enough to keep people out of the wrong places. She listened and said I was thinking like somebody who had already lost once. I nearly asked her how she knew. Instead, I said I was thinking like somebody who wanted to live. She gave me a small fold of gauze and an unopened bottle of antiseptic from her own bathroom cabinet in exchange for 2 sealed bottles of water and a can of soup. Then she told me to keep my door shut if the stairwell started making ugly sounds after dark. She said ugly sounds came before ugly people. That was one more rule I wrote down. By late afternoon, the news tone had shifted. At first, the anchors had been careful, almost embarrassed. Now the words were sharper. Local emergency notices, transit disruption, stay inside if possible, non-essential travel discouraged, temporary communication issues in several downtown blocks. The network bars on my phone flickered at the edges, then dropped to 1, then rose again as if the city itself were breathing poorly. I carried the last grocery load upstairs just before dusk and felt the temperature in the building change. Not the weather, the building. The lobby air had that tight, waiting quality that comes before a storm, except there was no storm on the radar that mattered. A family was arguing by the mailboxes. Somebody in the line for the elevators was talking too loudly about leaving town in the morning. A man in a wet jacket kept looking at the front doors as if he expected someone to run in. I had almost reached my floor when the lights blinked once. Then again. Then they stayed dim for exactly long enough to make everyone in the hallway stop talking. That was when I knew the city had started to let go. I got my door shut, threw the chain, and stood still with my hand on the deadbolt while the entire building listened for what came next. It came as a flicker first. The hallway light outside my door blinked once, dimmed, and came back in a weaker shade of white. Then I heard the freight elevator on the other side of the wall give a slow mechanical cough and stop half a floor short. Somebody in the corridor laughed nervously. Somebody else called out that the power had to be temporary. Then the emergency strip along the floor came on in a dull orange line, and all at once the tower became a place that looked less like a home and more like a machine losing one part at a time. My phone buzzed with a city alert before the signal bar even disappeared. Stay indoors. Avoid the downtown core. Reports of violent incidents and communications disruption. Shelter in place if you can. That was the official language. The meaning was simpler. The city was done pretending it could control what was happening. I moved without thinking too hard because thinking too hard was how you missed steps. The bookcase pressed against the apartment door from the inside. I added the kitchen chair to the handle side and tied the deadbolt lever with a length of zip tie so it would not rattle loose if somebody hit the door hard enough to test it. I dragged the folding cart to the hallway and stacked the heaviest water jugs near the apartment wall. The rule in my head was simple. Anything that could be useful as a barrier had to be close enough to use before fear changed its shape. Then I listened. The building spoke in layers once the main power failed. Fans wound down somewhere in the walls. The elevator settled in its shaft. Doors opened and shut. People asked each other if they had seen the same alert. A child cried once and was hushed. A man across the hall kept repeating that his wife was still downstairs in the lobby. I heard Marisol's door open 2 floors below me, then close again. She called up the stairwell in a calm voice and told people not to use the elevators under any circumstances. That alone told me she was already thinking 3 moves ahead. By 8 o'clock, the lobby had become louder than the street. I could hear the front doors opening and closing as residents tried to get answers from the desk staff, even though the desk staff had probably already gone home. Somewhere in the lobby, a man started shouting that the internet was dead. Another person shouted back that it was not the internet, it was the cell system. Then a third voice, lower and more frightened, said somebody had just bitten a delivery worker near the coffee kiosk. I froze at that line because I knew exactly what hallway they meant. The delivery worker was probably one of mine. Could have been one of the other app drivers who spent half their nights in our lobby, waiting with paper bags and thermal packs and the kind of tired expression people wear when they are just trying to finish a shift. I had no way to check. The important thing was not the exact face. The important thing was that the building had already become a place where the infection and the panic could find each other. I turned the radio on low. The local station was a mess of static and clipped reports. Hospital diversion, road closures, police asking people to stay clear of downtown. Then a woman with a steady voice came on and said several neighborhoods had lost power in a rolling failure tied to the grid collapse. She did not use the word zombies, obviously. No one official ever would at first. But the way she paused before each new sentence told me the people in charge were already trying to pick words that would not make the rest of the city run. I set the radio beside my water and started a log on a piece of notebook paper. Time, power status, phone signal, noise from the hall, water available, food available. The act of writing did more for me than the words themselves. It made the night into data, and data was something I knew how to hold. At 10, the lights failed completely. Not all at once. That would have been cleaner. First, the hall strip died. Then the kitchen light in my apartment gave a weak pulse and went dark. Then the emergency LEDs in the corridor outside flashed twice and settled into a dim, battery-fed glow. The apartment itself was suddenly a box of shapes, a line of rain on the window, the pale rectangle of the refrigerator door, the folded corner of the blackout fabric where I had not taped it tightly enough. Somewhere below me, a woman screamed. Then there was a sound I had never been able to forget from the first version of events. A body hitting a stairwell handrail hard enough to make the metal ring. The infected were in the tower now. I did not run out to check. I moved to the peephole, lowered my breathing, and looked into a corridor that had turned into a narrow tunnel of orange light. A man in the opposite unit had his door open just enough to show his face. He was staring toward the stairwell with the same blank horror I felt in my own stomach. Then something moved at the far end of the hall, too fast to identify in the dimness, and the man slammed his door and threw the deadbolt so loudly that the sound echoed all the way back to me. After that, I heard the first pounding on the stairwell door. It was not organized, it was not intelligent. It was a simple, repeated force against metal, and every hit made the landing vibrate through the wall. Someone downstairs shouted for help. Someone else shouted not to open the door. A woman was crying. I could not tell if the crying was in the stairwell or behind another apartment door. The whole tower was mixing itself up. I put my ear to the wall and listened for the pattern. One set of footsteps moved up the west stairwell. Another moved down the east stairwell. Then both stopped. Then one set resumed in a dragging shuffle that did not match a healthy person climbing. I knew that sound from my death. That was enough to make the choice for me. I stayed in the apartment, kept the chain on, and let the landing become somebody else's bad idea. Near midnight, Marisol called my phone. The network was weak enough that every word arrived with a tiny delay, but her voice was clear. She asked if I had extra bottled water and whether I could hear the stairwell on my floor. I told her yes to both. She said to keep the apartment door closed and not to answer anyone who only knocked once. One knock could be fear, or confusion, or a drunk tenant who lost their keys. 2 quick knocks and a pause were what people used when they were sure the building was still normal. Right then, normal was the most dangerous thing in the tower. I asked if she was alone. She said for the moment. Then she told me to take a wet towel, place it under the apartment door, and keep the bathroom fan off. If a vent line started carrying smoke or worse, I did not want it in my room. It was the kind of advice you only got from someone who had spent enough hours in a hospital to know how small a room could become when systems started failing. I did what she said. I also moved the food boxes from the kitchen into the hall closet and then back again, because panic gives you nonsense work if you let it. At some point around 1 in the morning, I ate half a tuna packet with crackers and drank tea out of a mug I did not remember washing. It tasted like salt and metal and a little bit like control. The next morning was not really morning. It was a gray shift in the light through the taped window. Power had not returned. The elevators were dead. The lobby intercom had gone silent. I could hear a generator somewhere in the building kick on for a few seconds, then fail, then kick on again. But it was not enough to restore anything except the knowledge that someone else was still trying. At 7, I opened the apartment door only enough to check the hall. The corridor was empty except for a torn takeout menu and a smear of muddy water leading toward the stairwell. I did not step out. I just watched for movement. The west stairwell door had a piece of red tape across the handle from the building office, but the tape had already been half torn away. When I closed the door, I found a note wedged beneath the frame. It was from Kenji Sato, the superintendent. If you are still inside, he had written, do not use the elevators. Manual lock on freight access is holding, but not forever. Meet me by the package room at 8 if conditions are clear. Bring a flashlight. Bring water. Do not bring anything you cannot carry fast. That was the first practical instruction I trusted all night. At 8, I went down 2 floors by the back stairwell, moving slowly and listening for that same dragging step that had killed me before. The stairwell smelled different now. Sweating concrete, stale coffee, old rain, human breath trapped in an enclosed shaft. Kenji stood by the package room door with a wrench in one hand and a small key ring in the other. He had grease on his sleeve and the expression of a man who was trying to keep a whole building alive with half the tools he wanted. He looked me over once, saw the bags under my eyes, and said, "You heard it too." I asked what he meant. He nodded toward the lobby side and said the first thing the system lost was not power, it was confidence. Once residents started using the stairs all at once, the freight door jammed, the lobby security panel stopped responding, and the backup generator got overloaded by people trying to force things that were never meant to move together. He unlocked the package room and showed me the shelf he had already turned into a reserve station. Battery packs, 2 hand lights, maintenance gloves, spare fuses, map printouts from the fire code binder, half a roll of caution tape. You know the tower, he said. I know the systems. If we are smart, we can keep the worst of it from flowing upward. That line was the first thing anybody had said to me since the reset that sounded like a plan instead of a prayer. We spent the next hour moving through the service corridor, one careful section at a time. Kenji showed me the manual release for the freight elevator and why he wanted it disabled before anyone got ideas. The car could turn into a trap if it got stuck between floors. He showed me the circuit box for the lobby lights. He showed me the loading dock camera, which had already started dropping frames. He pointed out the angle where the west stairwell blind spot began and the place where someone could stand just outside the camera view and wait for a door to open. I told him about the stairwell turn where I had died before. He did not laugh. He did not ask if I was joking. He just nodded once and said that the tower had probably taken at least one person already, which meant there would be more if we got careless. By late morning, we had the tower divided in our heads the same way I had divided my apartment. The apartment floors were residence. The package room was supply. The service corridor was buffer. The stairwell landing was danger. The freight elevator was dead weight unless we could pin it. We began moving what we could before the building made the choice for us. I brought my bottled water down in a folding cart. Kenji carried a box of batteries and a plastic tub of first aid items he said were originally for tenant move-ins and minor maintenance injuries. We pushed the food boxes from my floor into the package room in 2 trips. Marisol came out of her apartment only long enough to hand over a bag of antihistamines, 2 boxes of bandages, and a small battery fan she said could be useful if the air in the hall got stale enough to make people stupid. She did not step across the threshold into the service corridor. She did not need to. We understood the line. Before noon, the tower's water pressure started to weaken. The kitchen tap in my apartment coughed once, then settled into a thin stream. A bathroom on the lower floor started making a hammering noise in the pipes. Kenji swore softly and said the pressure booster was probably cycling under strain. That meant the tower would not stay comfortable for long. I went back upstairs and filled every container I owned while I still could. The jugs went under the kitchen table. The smaller bottles went on the shelf by the bed. The cleaning water went in the bathtub. I put one trash bag inside another and lined them with absorbent towels in case the toilets stopped behaving normally, because I knew from the first death that people make bigger mistakes when they are trying to ignore basic bodily problems. Everyone likes to imagine the apocalypse begins with gunfire. It usually begins with bad smell. By the time I finished, the tower had gone quiet in a way that felt worse than noise. There were still people moving in the halls, still a child crying somewhere, still the occasional shout, but the steady urban background had thinned out. No elevator hum, no lobby chatter, no delivery scooters humming at the curb below. The absence of those sounds made every footstep feel deliberate. That evening, Marisol called my door once and waited for me to answer through the chain. She wanted to know how much water I had left after the refill and whether I had noticed a fever smell in the hall. I told her I had enough for 3 days if I stayed strict. She said that was better than most of the floor and gave me the first real medical list I had heard from her. Watch for confusion. Watch for unsteady movement. Watch for red eyes and sudden aggression. Do not mistake fever weakness for safety. The infected could still reach a stair landing even when they looked unsteady. One weak person in a narrow place could still kill you if you trusted the gap. I asked if anybody on her floor had symptoms. She said 1 resident had vomited, 2 had panicked, and 1 man was convinced the blackout was a government test. None of that meant infection yet. It just meant the tower had entered the stage where fear starts to imitate sickness. We both went quiet after that. There was nothing else to say that would help. After dark, someone pounded on the lobby doors below us for nearly 10 minutes. The building had a sound system for the entry alcove, and somebody on the ground floor must have still had a battery backup because we heard a frightened man's voice asking residents to stay calm while he tried to reach maintenance. Then came a crash, then screaming, then several people shouting at once. The lobby camera feed on the package room monitor went fuzzy and then went black. Kenji shut off the monitor and said there was no use feeding our nerves with static. I agreed. The first night after the blackout, I slept with one eye open and the radio on low. I kept the pry bar beside the bed. I kept my shoes on. I did not go back to the stairwell landing because I had already learned what happened to men who thought the stairwell would wait for them. When I woke, the tower smelled like wet paper and old pipes. That was how I knew the water problem had become real. The taps still worked if you waited long enough, but the pressure was too thin to trust. The toilets began to refill slowly. One sink spit air before water. Another gave me brownish droplets that made me stop and stare before I decided not to use that line again until we had flushed it through. Kenji said the building's storage tanks were probably being drawn down in uneven cycles, and that if the grid stayed off much longer, the upper floors would feel it first. I began separating clean water from everything else. Drink water in one corner, cooking water in another, wash water in the bathroom, emergency water under the bed. It looked obsessive until the tower got worse. Then it looked reasonable. Marisol started leaving notes under my door in the afternoon because she did not want to rely on phone calls if the network died completely. Her notes were brief and practical. 1 line on hydration, 1 line on fever, 1 line on the fact that no one should trust a stairwell voice asking for help if they could not see the person's face. She wrote like a nurse and not like a dramatist, which was exactly what I needed. That was the shape of the first 2 days. Close the door. Count the water. Listen to the stairs. Keep the supplies together. Do not trust noise. Do not trust the first story the city tells you about itself. Outside, rain kept falling on downtown Seattle. Inside, the tower started becoming a place you could only hold if you accepted its limits. The apartment, the package room, the service corridor, the stairwell line, the people on the other side of the doors. It was all still there. It was all still standing. But now I could feel the building settling into a different kind of life, one that depended less on comfort and more on discipline. That was when Kenji asked me to help him check the generator room. The request came just before dusk. It was the first time since the reset that I heard a man sound tired enough to be honest about it. "If we can get one more clean cycle out of the backup unit," he said, "we can keep the hall lights and the radio fed. If not, we are doing this in the dark much sooner than I like." I took my flashlight and followed him down toward the mechanical floor while the tower above us breathed its thin, frightened air. The generator room sat behind a steel door marked "Authorized Personnel Only" in letters that had flaked at the edges from years of maintenance dust. The room itself smelled like hot metal and old oil. A backup unit sat in the middle of the concrete floor, larger than I had expected, with a fuel line, a transfer switch, and a panel of blinking indicators that now glowed in dim, unreliable colors. Kenji crouched by the side cover and pointed out a fault relay that had tripped when the power surge hit the building. He did not talk like a man trying to impress me. He talked like a man trying to keep me from doing something stupid with my hands. "If you touch the wrong line while the battery stage is on," he said, "you will learn a very fast lesson." I believed him immediately. He shut the unit down, opened a panel with a driver from his pocket, and showed me the breaker sequence one line at a time. I held the flashlight steady. That was my job in the room. Keep the light on the work, keep the shadows away from the panel, and do not invent a better method than the one the man with the wrench was already using. The fault was simple enough once he found it. One relay had half burned on contact and the transfer switch had jammed under load. He bypassed the bad relay, reseated the switch, and then had me cycle the manual start while he watched the meter. The engine caught on the third attempt with a hard metallic shudder that made both of us stand still for a second just to hear whether the vibration stayed even. It did. The hallway lights on the floor above us flickered back on in a weak but useful line. Kenji let out one long breath through his nose. I did not realize I had been holding mine until then. The fix did not restore the building. It just bought us a little more time and a little more control. The hall lights stayed on. The radio got power. One of the package room outlets could charge a battery bank. The freight elevator remained disabled, which was exactly what we wanted. I wrote all of that down because I did not trust memory once fatigue started touching the edges of the day. By the third day, the tower had entered a new phase. The power stayed on in enough places to make people hopeful, which was its own kind of problem. Hope makes people move. Moving people make noise. Noise pulls attention in a building full of narrow stairs and closed doors. The water pressure fell again in the afternoon. This time the taps did not recover on their own. I heard the first complaint before I saw the failure. Somebody on the 9th floor shouted that the toilet would not refill. Another resident banged on a pipe wall and asked if the city had shut the water off on purpose. Then a smell drifted into the stairwell that told me sanitation had stopped being abstract. The building was now producing its own problems faster than the utility system could help. Marisol answered that stage better than I did. She taped a note to the package room door that said, in her careful handwriting, "Use water once. Clean with wipes. Bag waste immediately. Do not wait for the smell to tell you it is time." Kenji and I followed her advice because it was practical. We set aside one corner of the package room for clean water, one for cooking, and one for wash and disposal. Trash bags went into a plastic bin with absorbent material and a lid. Gloves stayed beside the bin. Wipes stayed in a separate box so they would not vanish into random use. We put a roll of tape, a marker, and a spare packet of masks on top. That way, no one had to open a cabinet in the dark and guess at anything. The first residents to notice the system were the ones who still wanted the tower to behave like a normal apartment. One man from the 15th floor knocked on the package room door and asked if the generator could run his air conditioner. He sounded insulted when Kenji said no. Another woman wanted to know why the freight elevator was not being used for deliveries if the power was back. I told her because the tower was not normal and because a dead elevator shaft is worse than a hot room. She did not like that answer, but she heard it. Marisol laughed softly when I repeated it later. Not because it was funny, Because it was true, and people hated truths that came wrapped in inconvenience. That evening, the radio carried the first longer emergency bulletin. It said additional downtown blocks had lost power. It said cellular service was becoming unreliable. It said people should conserve water, avoid main corridors, and expect delays in food distribution. It did not say what I already knew from the first death and the second chance. It did not say that every delay made the stairs worse. It did not say that a tower full of people would turn into a pressure vessel if enough of them panicked at once. It did say that supply trucks had been rerouted. That was the line Kenji heard and turned toward me for. He said we had enough food for several days if no one was wasteful, but antiseptic, antibiotics, and fuel stabilizer would run low first. The generator had a fuel tank, but the backup supply was not a miracle. It was only a cushion. If we wanted the building to remain useful, we needed to keep that cushion from disappearing. He was right, and I knew it. So I made the list for the outside run. Antiseptic, pain relief, anti-diarrhea tablets, batteries, fuel stabilizer, 1 more pack of masks, 2 cases of bottled water if we could carry them. I added coffee, because the mind gets softer without one small comfort, and because I had learned from the first loop of this disaster that morale is not a joke when you are one bad decision away from losing the stairs. Kenji did not like the idea of leaving the tower, but he liked running out of supplies even less. We left at first light on the 5th day, with rain already gathering in the low street drains. The loading dock door opened onto an alley that smelled like salt air, wet concrete, and a garbage truck that had not come by in too long. Seattle in the rain looked calm from a distance and hard up close. Puddles hid broken glass. Delivery vans sat with their hazard lights off. A bicycle leaned against a closed cafe as if the rider had stepped inside for a minute and never came back. The city did not look bombed. It looked interrupted. We moved on foot because the streets were blocked in the places that mattered. Cars were stuck at awkward angles near intersections where traffic lights had gone dark. One bus had stopped dead in the lane with its doors open and no driver in sight. A pair of commuters walked the wrong direction with their backpacks held tight to their chests, as if they still thought they were late for work and not trapped in a city that had forgotten to continue. The pharmacy we wanted had already lost half its front window. The glass was shattered, but the shelves inside were not bare yet. That made both of us slower. Empty shelves mean somebody got there first. Half-empty shelves mean the place is still dangerous because more people know it exists. Kenji stood watch at the front while I moved down the aisle with my list and my empty pack. We found antiseptic wipes, a small bottle of iodine, 2 packs of anti-diarrhea tablets, a handful of individually wrapped bandages, a box of pain relievers, and a bundle of batteries in the wrong aisle where someone had probably dropped them while running. I took the batteries anyway. At the back of the store, I heard the unmistakable sound of a hand striking a metal shutter. We both froze. The sound came again, then a dragging moan that rolled through the narrow stockroom door. I looked at Kenji. He looked at me. Neither of us wanted to be the man who checked the wrong door in a building full of the wrong doors. We backed out of the aisle and left the shutter to whatever was making the noise on the other side. The fuel stop was worse. One station had already been stripped of everything portable. Another had its pumps shut down under a police chain. A third had a broken windshield and an empty office. We finally found a small hardware supply outlet near the edge of the block where the owner had moved the last of the fuel stabilizer and a pallet of bottled water into a rolling storage cage. The front counter was guarded by a tired-looking employee with a baseball bat and a radio that sounded like it was broadcasting from underwater. He did not want to sell to 2 men carrying backpacks and looking like they had not slept properly. I showed him cash. Kenji showed him an old building permit card with the tower address on it. That made the man relax just enough to let us bargain. We left with 2 fuel cans, 1 bottle of stabilizer, a case of water, and enough extra batteries to make the trip worth the risk. On the walk back, rain thickened enough to turn the sidewalks into silver strips. We passed the lobby of a closed bank where 4 people were standing under the awning and arguing about whether to break into a parked SUV with a bag of groceries visible on the rear seat. Nobody was infected. That was almost worse. The living can be reasoned with only until hunger changes the shape of their patience. One of the men saw our packs and asked if we had extra water. Kenji kept walking. I did too. There was no point pretending this was a community when everyone had reached the point of measuring strangers by what they might be carrying. The city had already taught that lesson. I did not need to repeat it in the rain. By the time we returned to the tower, the lobby doors were crowded with people from inside. Not outside. Inside. That was the part that made my stomach tighten. They were tenants, most likely. A woman with a backpack and a blanket over one shoulder. A man in slippers. A teenager holding a phone as if it still meant something. They had gathered where the lobby could be seen because the lobby was still where normal people expected answers. The security desk had no one behind it. The front glass reflected only their own worried faces. They wanted to know when power would come back. They wanted to know if the water would return. They wanted to know whether we had heard from management. Kenji told them the truth in the shortest possible form. Not yet. No official update. Stay off the elevators. Keep to your floors. One man complained that we were hiding supplies. I answered that if he wanted to carry a water case up 14 floors in the dark, he was welcome to try, but he was not using my key to do it. He called me selfish. I did not answer. Then the loudest sound of the night hit from the street side of the lobby. Something slammed against the outer glass doors hard enough to make the frame rattle. Everyone in the lobby went still. The second hit came from lower, as if whatever was outside had stumbled. Then a wet scraping noise moved along the sidewalk side of the entry, and one of the women in the lobby started crying because she had seen enough on the news to know what that sound probably meant. The building's front camera feed flickered across the package room monitor, and I caught one broken frame of a man in a torn rain jacket moving strangely at the edge of the vestibule light. Not fast, not coordinated, just wrong enough. Kenji shut the inner lobby door and told everyone to step back. I hit the manual lock. The man who had called me selfish took one look at the glass and stopped arguing. Fear makes useful choices for people even when they dislike the person making them. Nobody opened the front doors. Nobody tried to go see what was outside. We kept the line closed and listened while the thing on the sidewalk wandered off toward the avenue, dragging a wet sound through the rain. That night I understood something important. The tower could survive the outbreak if the infected stayed outside and the residents stayed rational. The problem was that neither condition could be trusted, so I doubled the security rules. No one opened a door alone. No one used the stairwell landing as a shortcut. No one borrowed supplies without a return. No one went to the lobby without a specific reason. No one spoke through a closed door as if that made them safer than the person on the other side. Marisol approved every one of those rules through the crack in her door. She also told me that one of the tenants on her floor had finally developed a fever and a strange shake in the hands, but that it did not yet look like the same thing the hospital reports had described. She kept the person isolated and said she would watch through the night. I asked if she wanted me to come down. She said no. Her tone made it clear that she did not want company. She wanted space, water, and the ability to close a door if the symptoms got worse. I respected that because it was exactly how I wanted people to respect my own door. By the end of the day, the tower felt smaller, not physically. We had not lost rooms. We had lost assumptions. People no longer wandered to the lobby for reassurance. They stayed on their floors and listened through the walls. The package room became a place where runs were logged and items were weighed and counted. The apartment became the only room I fully trusted. The service corridor stayed a line I did not cross without looking both ways first. The radio crackled all evening with more reports of the downtown core being sealed in pockets. Some streets were open, then closed again. Some buildings had generators. Some did not. Some people were still being evacuated. Others were told to shelter where they were. I listened to all of it and did not feel better. But I felt less blind. That mattered. The fifth night ended the same way the others had, with rain on the windows, the radio low on the counter, and my notes growing longer as the city got more honest about what it was becoming. When I finally lay down, I could hear the stairwell door 2 floors below me open and shut once. No shouting came after it. That was worse than shouting, because it meant someone had either learned restraint or run out of the energy to keep being afraid out loud. I kept the pry bar near the bed and waited for the next morning. The next morning brought no improvement, only a clearer view of the damage. The rain had eased into a thin mist, but the street below looked worse because of it. Puddles reflected broken traffic lights and the pale shape of abandoned cars. From my taped window, I could see a delivery scooter lying on its side near the curb, its box still attached. I did not know whether the rider had run, been taken by the infected, or simply left the bike where it died. In that first moment of the day, all three answers felt possible. My phone still had enough signal for one weak message from Marisol. "One of my neighbors has a fever, and the tremor is worse," she wrote. "He can still answer questions, but the answer is slower each time. If he turns, I will not open the hall door. I want you to know that I understand the rule." I read that note twice. Then I wrote back the only honest thing I could say. "Keep the door shut. Keep the water close. Call me if you need light." She replied with a single word. "Understood." That was the kind of trust this tower could support. Brief, practical, built on the fact that both of us knew what happened when people tried to be generous in the wrong place. By midday, the water stopped again, this time for longer. The taps gave me one thin burst, and then nothing. The toilets in my apartment made a hollow gurgle and refused to fill. Kenji came up the service corridor carrying a pair of utility buckets and said the upper reserve tanks were probably drawing air. He had grease on his hands, a radio on his belt, and the tired expression of a man who had spent too long being the adult in the room. We spent the next hour making the tower more primitive. Every sink got a measured cup from the reserve. Every toilet got a bucket flush if needed. Every trash bag got tied closed and moved to the package room so the smell did not get into the apartment floors. We used wipes for everything else. Hands, counters, door handles, the radio buttons, the folding cart handle. I did not like how much time it took, but I liked the way the building smelled when we were done better than I liked the smell before. Kenji also showed me how to wedge the service stairwell door from the inside using a chair leg, 2 wooden blocks and a strip of chain around the latch. "If the lobby goes bad," he said, "this door will not save us by itself. It just needs to fail slower than people do." That was the best engineering definition of hope I had heard in years. On the 7th day, the stairwell gave us the first true test. I was in the package room sorting batteries when I heard a thudding noise from the west stairwell landing. Not the heavy, explosive hit of somebody trying to kick the door down. Something smaller. Something dragging. Then a low moan that rose and stopped all at once. Kenji and I moved to the camera feed together. The stairwell camera was grainy but usable. A man in a torn gray shirt stood on the landing 2 floors below ours, with his head tipped too far to one side. His hand was smeared with blood. He was staring at the door as if he knew there was something on the other side and could not quite remember what to do with that knowledge. I felt the old death in my chest before I felt anything else. The infected man started up the stairs 1 step at a time. Not fast, not dramatic, just relentless in the way that made him worse. Kenji asked if I wanted to use the freight corridor to draw him away. I said no. That stairwell had already taken one version of me. I was not going to invent a second bad plan just because the first one was scary. Instead, we waited with the service stair door locked and the chain in place. The man reached the landing below ours, stopped, and turned his head toward the gap as if he smelled us. He hit the door once with the side of his hand, then again. Then he pressed close enough that I could hear the wet drag of his breathing through the camera microphone. Marisol called my phone at exactly that moment. She had heard the stair noise from 2 floors down and wanted to know if it was on my side too. I told her yes. She said, very quietly, that the tremoring resident on her floor had gone cold in the face and then hot again, and that she was preparing to keep him isolated if he woke up wrong. She asked whether I had any more masks or gloves to spare. I sent them through the package room with Kenji 5 minutes later. That exchange mattered more than the supplies. It told me the tower still had a few people left who understood lines, limits, and duty. The infected on the stair landing eventually wandered back down, drawn away by a sound we never found. We did not open the door to check. We did not need to. The rule had already been proven again. By the 8th day, the building had settled into a narrow rhythm. The apartment floors woke up, rationed water, listened to the radio, and waited for the next report. The package room held the reserve. The lobby stayed locked except for supervised movement. Marisol kept acting as the medical anchor for the floors above and below hers. Kenji kept the generator alive in short, noisy cycles. I kept the counts. That was enough work to make the days feel real and not just stacked fear. Still, the tower was not safe. It was only organized. Those are not the same thing. The difference showed up after dark on the 8th night when a group from outside began banging on the lobby glass. At first I thought it was just another cluster of frightened people looking for shelter, But then I saw them on the camera feed. 3 men, a woman with a backpack and a teenager holding a rolling suitcase by one handle because one wheel had broken off. They were soaked through with rain and carrying the particular desperation of people who had already been rejected by 2 other places. One of the men shouted that his mother lived in the tower. Another said their building had lost water. The woman asked if we had a doctor. Then one of them said they had seen movement in the street behind them and wanted the lobby open before whatever was coming got close. They were not lying about the fear. I could hear that much in the tone. But fear was not enough. I went downstairs with Kenji, and Marisol stayed on the radio line in case the resident on her floor woke confused. We did not open the lobby doors. We spoke through the inner glass and kept the chain in place. I told the group that we could not admit anyone we had not verified, and that if they wanted help they needed to step back from the door and show their hands. The man who claimed his mother was inside started shouting over me. The woman tried to calm him down. The teenager kept looking over his shoulder toward the avenue. Then the infected came around the corner at the far end of the sidewalk. It was only one at first, but one is enough if the world around it is confused. The group outside scattered in 3 different directions. The man with the claim about his mother ran straight into the rain. The woman slipped on the wet concrete and caught herself on the awning post. The teenager froze long enough to make the wrong choice and then bolted after the others. The infected did not sprint. It just kept coming, drawn by movement, drawn by sound, drawn by the fact that panic always points the way. I closed the inner lobby grate. Kenji locked the manual bar. The infected hit the outer glass once and then drifted off toward the running people in the street. We did not go after them. We did not open anything. We simply held the line while the rain made the whole scene look both smaller and sadder than it would have in sunlight. After that, no one in the tower complained when I said the building was at capacity. People still disliked the answer, but they heard it. The 9th day was quieter, which made it dangerous in a different way. Quiet gives people room to think, and thinking gives people room to imagine there are easier exits than the ones you have already chosen. Marisol came up to the package room in person for the first time, staying 3 feet back from the door line and speaking through her mask. She looked tired enough to lean on the wall, but her eyes were steady. The fever patient on her floor had stabilized, she said, which did not mean safe. It meant watchful. He was still weak and confused, but the shaking had not worsened and he had not turned violent. She wanted to keep him isolated another day. She also wanted 1 more bottle of water and 1 more packet of pain relief. I gave her both. She gave me something in return that mattered more than the supplies. She told me the tower's upper floors were ready to move if an official corridor ever opened. People had packed what they could carry. Important papers were taped inside bags. Shoes were placed by the doors. Children had their coats and favorite blankets waiting. In other words, the building was no longer pretending this was temporary. That evening, Kenji and I took the only quiet walk we had left. We went up to the roof access door and stepped out long enough to check the block. Downtown Seattle looked like a city that had been covered with wet ash and then left alone. Traffic was absent. A few emergency lights burned in distant intersections. 1 plume of smoke rose from somewhere west of us and flattened under the low cloud cover. The streets below were too empty in some places and too crowded in others, which was how you knew the city was splitting into safe and unsafe pockets without any clear line between them. From the roof, I could see the route we would have to take when the time came. Not the exact path yet, just the direction. That mattered because it made the end of the story feel less like a miracle and more like a process. On the 10th day, the radio crackled with the first mention of a monitored safe corridor for the district. At first I thought I had misheard it. Then the announcer repeated the details in a slower voice. A corridor would open at noon the following day. It would be narrow. It would be supervised by emergency personnel. Travel would be controlled. Residents were instructed to verify identity, pack essentials only, and leave by the designated route if they chose to move. I did not feel relief right away. I felt suspicion first, which was healthier. Kenji felt the same. He went to the window, listened to the street, and said, "If the corridor is real, it will still be real in the morning." Marisol heard the broadcast through the hallway speaker and came to the package room with her bag already packed. That night we verified everything we could. We checked the street from the roof. We checked the lobby camera feed. We checked the route marker on the emergency map Kenji had printed from the firebinder. We checked the city alerts against the local radio. We compared notes on the infected, the looters, the power failures, and the blocks that were still dark. We did not trust a single announcement just because it sounded hopeful. The announcement held up. At dawn on the 11th day, the corridor was still active. This time I believed it because the radio repeated it. The street below had actual movement in official vests, and the block had not produced a new disaster overnight. That was enough. I packed only what fit in one bag and one delivery cart. Food, water, antiseptic, 2 flashlights, spare batteries, the radio, my papers, 1 clean shirt, the pry bar. Because habits die slowly. Kenji said the building would hold for a while without me. Marisol said the same, and then touched the edge of the door frame with 2 fingers as if marking the fact that we had all crossed from one part of the disaster into another. We did not celebrate. We stood in the package room for a moment with our bags ready and listened to the tower breathe around us. No one was crying. No one was shouting. The fear was still there, but it had shifted into fatigue, and fatigue was easier to live with than panic. Then we started down the stairs. I kept to the middle of the landing, exactly where the wall did not force me into a corner. I checked each corner before I entered it. I did not open any closed doors. I did not answer any voices that sounded uncertain from behind me. That old death still lived in my body as a set of rules, and this time I followed them. At the lobby, the outer doors stood open just enough for the corridor workers to move people in controlled groups. The street air hit my face first. It smelled like rain, wet asphalt, and distant smoke, but it also smelled like movement, which was the first clean thing I had breathed in days. An emergency worker checked my wristband, glanced at the bag, and pointed me toward the monitored lane. I looked back once. The tower stood behind me with its dark windows, its repaired hall lights, and its small, stubborn package room full of the things that had kept us alive. Marisol was still inside. Kenji was still inside. The building was still dangerous, but it was no longer the only thing standing between me and the city. That was enough to make my next breath come easier. I walked into the corridor with my bag in one hand and my delivery cart in the other. For the first time since the reset, I believed I might actually make it to the other side.